Well, hi there, everyone. Welcome to Interchange. I'm Dan Jones. Lots to talk about today. The Obama Healthcare Summit, what, if anything, was really accomplished? We'll talk about the new state law that says public school sex education classes must teach about birth control and STDs. We will also talk about Anthony Stansel, the former New Berlin High School student, getting 15 years in prison for his sex crimes against other students. And we'll talk about Milwaukee County workers getting even more furlough days without pay. All right, joining us now, our newspaper columnist, Joel McNally. Kevin Fischer, aiide to Republican State Senator Mary Lozick, and oftentimes a host over at WISN Radio. Denise Callaway, the communications director for the Greater Milwaukee Foundation. And Gerard Randall, consultant and local job creation expert. Rick Horowitz will be along with commentary at the end of the show. All right, the first thing we're going to talk about is the Obama Healthcare Summit. After all is said and done, I think the only thing it really accomplished is showing the country that these two sides are really completely on different pages, and there isn't going to be any cooperation whatsoever because they have totally different approaches to how the problem should be solved. I don't even really know why they even held the thing.
Well, I think it gave the president an opportunity to get his points across. But it also gave the Republicans a chance to make some points as well. I think being represented by our own Congressman Paul Ryan, they had the chance to put some facts and figures out there to counteract some of the information that has been floating around there, some of it incorrect about the Republican position, for example, and some of it incorrect about what the bill contains. Both versions, the House and the Senate versions. It didn't, I don't think, move public opinion in favor of proceeding with getting some kind of bill passed out of Congress, particularly if they are looking at using the nuclear option. That is, attempting to pass the bill with a simple majority coming out using what is formally called reconciliation. I don't think that has happened in any significant way because people are still concerned greatly about the cost. That didn't change. And also people want to see the details. And they certainly didn't present any more information than what's already out there in the public domain for folk to react to any differently than what they've already weighed in on. So all in all, I think it was a wash. If you sat and you watched for 7.5 hours, God bless you.
Then get a life.
That's it. I couldn't take more than an hour of it. And after an hour, you pretty much saw that it was a public relations effort that just went bust.
Denise, I think Obama is sincere when he says he's reaching out and wants to compromise and cooperate. But the reality is, I don't think that's how this system works in this country, and it's not going to happen.
It sure doesn't work that way in Washington anymore. It doesn't. And I think that it was an effort to show, I think, two things. First, for people to get their respective points out, both the Democrats and the Republicans. But I'm not so sure that President Obama didn't want us to see how entrenched these two sides are and how, at this point in time, we can have compromise. So we're going to move forward. We're going to move forward with the Democrats pushing the bill through. And I think that was also something that he wanted folks to be able to see. And it certainly, I think, was clear to anybody who watched it.
I think that's exactly what the Democrats are going to do. They're going to try to push it through.
I do too, and I think they should. And I'm glad that this took place so that they could do that. It did make it very clear that the Republicans were not interested in passing very much at all in health care. They have a plan which covers something like 3 million people. Compared to the 30 million when we're talking about a comprehensive health care plan. And they simply had no interest in, even though they give lip service to, yeah, we want to do something about pre-existing conditions, and yeah, we want to do something to stop people from being kicked off out of their insurance just because they get sick. But you can't do that unless you set up a system so that healthy people have to buy insurance along with sick people. If you only have sick people being forced to buy insurance, it is very, very expensive, and the whole system falls apart. So what Gerard calls a nuclear option, and there were some Republicans I actually did watch most of the 7.5 hours. I actually did. And at several points, Republicans said, well, you can't have this reconciliation process. The people of America are against it.
Yeah, they are.
If you ask the people of America if something in Congress gets 59 votes for it and 41 votes against it, do you think it should pass? People would say yes, of course. They don't care about the procedures. They don't care about, the name calling back and forth. And they really don't care, I think, to watch for 7.5 hours a bunch of people sitting around a table arguing about whether we should reform health insurance or not, when those people have health insurance and those people have the kind of health care that, in fact, the health care reform would provide for all of America. I think a whole lot of reaction to people was, they just don't get it. They don't get the problems that people have with the copays, with the premiums going up every year. This whole thing took place right after the big insurance companies announced premium increases of 39% after making more money last year than they made the year before. So I think, yes, this was to get the Democrats in place, to get the guts to pass health care reform, as the president said, and then face us in the election. If this is such a terrible program that is, in fact, going to stop the insurance companies from kicking people out of their insurance, going to get some control over these costs, I couldn't
If it was so great, they would have passed it by now.
No, as a matter of fact,
if it was so great, they would have passed it by now.
Because they haven't had the guts to do it yet. I think
they haven't had the guts because it's
the ability. They've been in power.
It's a terrible piece of legislation.
It is absolutely not.
I don't think it's just that whether or not they have the guts or they haven't had the guts. I think there has been an effort to say, what can we do in terms of compromise? Is there a way that we can bring people in? And it hasn't happened. So I think the Democrats don't have an option. The people who really don't have an option in this, though, are the 30 million people in this country who are without health insurance. We have 255,000 people just in the metro area who are using Badger Care because they either can't afford health insurance or they don't make enough money to purchase it. Those are the people who don't have options. We need to be able to move forward, get something through that's going to offer some options to people. It's not perfect. There's no piece of legislation that's ever been passed that's perfect. Let's start with this and then see what we need to do to improve it and make it better.
That's the Democrat definition of bipartisanship. They don't want to cross over.
Republicans refuse to cross over.
Yeah,
not on this one.
No, they've had dozens and dozens of plans that are just virtually being ignored by the Democrats who are in power. That's their definition of bipartisanship. Republicans, you come over and vote with us. We're not going to vote with you. This was a dog and pony show. There was no interest at all in what Republicans have to say or what they have to offer. If Republicans showed up, well, we are going to out-talk you, which they did. The Democrats, if you counted up the minutes, by far monopolized this health care summit 2-1. And if the Republicans didn't show up, well, then it was, we got you. You're not interested at all. And I'm sorry, Joel, this whole business about reconciliation, as short a period ago as 2005, right on down the line, Obama, Biden, Pelosi, Reid, Schumer, they were all saying when we get in power, we would never resort to using this tactic of reconciliation. And now they're talking about it because they want to ignore the will of the American people, which is that they do not want Obamacare. They want deliberation on reforming health care in America. They do not want such a radical socialistic plan rammed down our throats. And that's exactly what the Democrats want to do.
They got rid of the public option. They got rid of single-payer health care. They got rid of anything that was radical. This is a very moderate plan. The last time Republicans used reconciliation was tax cuts for the richest people in America. That's what they used it for. They used it 17 times. Now we're going to use it, in fact, for health care for all Americans, not tax cuts.
The problem is, this is still radical legislation. You say it's terrible. It's radical because you still have all that abortion stuff in there, which is going to be this.
Abortion's the law of the land. I thought you knew that.
It's interesting because some people thought at one point in time that civil rights legislation was also radical. I think the thing that's happened is we can't sit up here and try to wait and find the perfect way to do it, the perfect time to do it, because we have people who are hurting in this country because they don't have access to health care.
That's exactly what you do, Denise. You work it out.
Let me tell you what's happening in this country right now. We have examples within our own communities, considering the man who left his family to join the Army to get health care. Why? Because his insurance was going to go from $136 a month to $1,360 a month. In this country,
It's happening all the time.
we just cannot have people who face those kind of issues and problems. And why is that? At the same time that's happening, we're also finding health insurance companies that have record profits. Anthem Blue Cross is going to raise rates over 17% here. Its parent company made
It's
47.
the same rhetoric. It's the same.
No, it's not rhetoric.
It is.
It's
And you know what?
fact.
And you know what?
$4.7 billion in
Socialized
profit.
medicine is not the answer to every Democratic sob story. It is not.
These
right,
aren't top
these are
stories.
people.
This is what's happening to real people, and we need to pay attention to that.
So the government is going to come in and bail everybody out? I don't think so.
This is a private plan.
Next topic. Let's talk about, for just a minute or two, the new state law that requires public school sex education curriculums to include information about birth control and sexually transmitted diseases. I would think this is something that should have been in place about 40 years ago, but Kevin, all of the Republicans in Madison voted against it. Why?
Right, because it is Madison trying to dictate to every local community in the state. We just heard about how all these problems are happening in every community all over the state, including right here in our own backyard in Milwaukee. Well, Madison should not be dictating to MPS or any suburban school district on how they should be teaching something as serious and as delicate as sex education.
Why not?
This is the same governor who signed this bill into law that just a few years ago signed an abstinence bill into law that was authored by my boss, Senator Mary Lozick. Now we're going to be teaching 10-year-olds how to use condoms. I think that's wrong. And now we're telling, for example, the West Dallas, West Milwaukee School District, which offered two options to parents. One was an abstinence-only education, and one was an all-out comprehensive education. We're telling them you can't do that now. You have to get rid of the abstinence plank. And that's wrong. We should let every school district in the state decide how they want to proceed. And I think it's wrong to have such dramatic, all across the board, anything goes instruction about sex education to little kids. I think that's just wrong.
Doesn't Madison tell us how to do a lot of things anyway?
Madison does, the federal government does, local government tells me things that I don't want to do, but I'm compelled to do them. What's interesting about this piece of legislation, though, is that it already presumes that there are a number of school districts that are already doing this. Milwaukee, for example, they're already teaching those components in their sex education curriculum. What I worry about is how do these various school districts include parents in the teaching and the instruction of these very, very, very controversial kinds of curriculum comports. And I'm yet to hear how that piece of it is going to take place. Kevin mentioned that there are some school districts where the parents can opt out or take another option with regards to what they want to have taught. Bottom line is, all these school districts, if they're not going to include parents in some significant way in the instruction of this, not just a simple check the box to let them do it or not,
to have any kind of education.
That would be terrible, because we still have some of the highest teen pregnancy rates.
And that's what's being discussed in school districts around the state now. Right. Should we just dump the whole thing completely?
See, that is exactly why you need some standards. You can't have a sex education class that doesn't teach about sexually transmitted diseases or teen pregnancy.
To 8-year-olds?
To all the way through, so that kids get the education. It is absurd to, the problem with the abstinence-only education, it's been shown through all the research, is that it doesn't change the likelihood of whether a child has sex or not, but it does change the likelihood of whether the child uses a condom or uses safe sex when they do begin having sex. That kind of education is irresponsible. And why wouldn't you want to have minimum standards for something that important? You absolutely have to have in order to have decent sex education in this state.
We take a look at what's happening in terms of increased rates of sexually transmitted diseases, including AIDS. And you know where the area where it's growing the most? It's with young people, because they don't have information, they don't understand the consequences. It would be great if we could say that parents ought to teach this. And I agree that parents need to be involved in these discussions about what their children are going to learn, just as we want them involved in discussions about what they're going to be reading, what other types of things are going to be taking place in their schools. That needs to take place. But the reality of it is, we have kids who are putting their lives at risk because they don't have information.
Why would you give them the
and
false
one of the things,
perception that condoms are safe and that they're not going to get pregnant?
It's not a false perception. I mean, I take a look at what my children learn in school about sex eds, and it does not say, there's not been a piece that's crossed their desk that says condoms are a foolproof way to avoid pregnancy or sexually transmitted disease.
Then why push them?
It doesn't say that. You're not pushing them.
But you also don't want to scare them away from them.
You're giving kids information. And, you know, when we take a look at kids this age, so many of them think, I can do what I want to do because nothing bad's going to happen to me. If we don't arm our children with information, we are setting them up to hurt themselves, to hurt their futures.
What do you think a kid is going to do if you tell them in class, here's a condom, here's how to use it? What do you think that kid's going to do?
You know what? I'll tell you, Kevin.
Just answer the question.
I'll answer the question
The
by
same
saying
thing you
this.
did when you were a kid.
I've had 3 kids who've had sex education in MPS and in private schools, and in none of those cases did anybody pull out a condom and say, this is what you need and this is how you use it.
That's what this bill says is going to happen
That does not
in
happen.
schools.
But if you talk, no, it says that what the bill says is the information has to be offered. It doesn't prescribe that that's exactly the way that you have to do it.
All right,
You're pretty
next
naive
topic.
if you don't think they're going to tell kids how to use a condom.
All right, let's talk for just a few minutes about the 15-year sentence given to the sick creep Anthony Stansel. He's the former New Berlin high school student who posed as a girl online, got a bunch of fellow male students to send nude pictures of themselves. Then he blackmails some of these kids into sex acts, threatening to release their pictures if they don't do what he says. So he's 19 now. He'll be 34 when he gets out, even if he serves his full sentence. Yet another crime, in my opinion, that cries out for the death sentence. I think something like this. I absolutely think something like this.
I wouldn't give him the death sentence.
I
But I would ensure
He's hurt a lot of. He's hurt a lot of people.
I think you started it out right when you said he's a sick creep. That in and of itself would compel me to want to see that he got the kind of mental health treatment that he needed. And frankly, I thought the 15 years was far too little.
Yeah.
You know, he's still going to come out at a time when he's able to prey upon young people. He'll still be in the midst of some prime sexual urges just because of his age. And that's something that I wouldn't want. I just have a hard time believing that 15 years was thought to be an appropriate amount of time for the kind of crime that he did, even though he plea bargained it out.
It's still a lot, but you know where I'm coming from. I think he should have gotten in the 20 to 30 range. And you had a very conservative, lock him up kind of judge in Mac Davis out in Waukesha County. I thought he would have probably gone a little further. When he was found guilty back in December, I filled in for Mark Belling, and I asked the audience a 2-pronged question. What do you think he should get? And what do you think he will get?
Years.
You know, they wanted to, they were outraged. They wanted to lock him up and throw away the key. But they also said, knowing the way the judicial system works, especially in our state, they didn't think he was going to get much. And I don't really buy into this argument. Well, by plea bargaining, and we threw 10 felonies out, and we didn't have to have one kid go up there and testify. They're all being, facing counseling, and we didn't have to have them live through this ordeal. No, you want to send a message that you can't get away with this. And Denise, you said he hurt a lot of people. He did hurt a lot of people. It's happening in my community now at Franklin High School, where the kids are sexting each other. It's probably happening more than we think it is. And you have to send the right message that it will not be tolerated, because it is very serious.
Let me make it very clear. This was a horrible crime. It was a horrible crime. Anytime you coerce others into sex, it's a horrible crime. But also, let's take a little common sense and not be calling for the death penalty here. This is a juvenile. This is a juvenile.
He's 17, 18, 19 years old. We're not talking about a kid who rang a doorbell and ran.
But kids, we were talking about it before this show started.
I know where you're going, Joel.
Sometimes 21 years old kids.
Those aren't kids.
Are doing things that aren't very bright, and doing things that are wrong, and doing things that are stupid. 15 years to me is a substantial sentence. There's no way, this wasn't a tap on the wrist. This is a substantial sentence.
30,
let me tell you this. Whoever he is in 15 years is not going to be who he is today. He's a kid today. He's a
So?
kid. He's a child.
Am I supposed
today.
to feel sympathetic
no,
about this?
No, you probably won't, because
No.
you don't feel sympathetic to any human beings that I've heard on this show. But the truth of the matter is,
criminals.
in 15 years, he will be someone entirely different. You are not who you were in high school 15 years later. And to suggest that a crime by a child, any child,
was not a
I don't care who the child is, or I pretty much don't care what the crime is, to suggest
You
that a
always
child, we should
stick up for the
we
sex
should put
perverts
young
on this
people
show.
to death who do stupid things. This was a horrible crime. I'm not denying that.
Oh, you don't
But it's
think
a
so.
substantial
You always stick up
penalty.
I worry that he
Perverts.
won't be a better human being when he comes out.
Well,
I
I
think
think-
He may
he'll
well
be
not,
worse.
because
He's not going to be a better guy after 15 years in prison.
No, he's not going to be a better guy after 15 years in
Because
prison.
prison's
I think
not the
clearly, and this is not
He made
clearly
that
to make
choice.
excuses for him, but there's some issues that he has that has to be addressed.
Mm-hmm.
And if that doesn't take place, he's not going to be a better person when he comes out 15 years from now. I think 15 years is an appropriate sentence for him. I do. He's hurt a lot of people. But you can't lock up turn the key and throw it away and he never gets out. That's not a realistic way to take a look at what's happened here. We need to make sure that as part of whatever happens, he's able to address the issues that put him in this kind of situation that caused him to do these terrible things. Because otherwise, when he comes out 15 years from now, the only thing he's going to be is a better criminal than when he went in.
Well, the odds are he's going to get out and reoffend again, because that's what these guys do.
All right, a big group of Milwaukee County workers got another 10 unpaid furlough days piled on top of the 12 that had already been forced upon them. That's a month's worth of work without a paycheck. Does this show that Scott Walker is dead serious about balancing the county budget, or does it show that he's incompetent if he can't make ends meet without taking away paychecks?
No, I think what it points to is that we're still looking at short-term fixes to long-term problems. What we're witnessing essentially is a trade-off of paid vacations for furlough days. You still have workers who are getting paid vacation days. Almost each one of those paid vacation days for the average worker who gets 3 weeks of annual vacation time, there's a trade-off with a furlough day. But at some point, that's going to catch up to every municipality that has the same issues that the county is facing right now. I read an article where the Chicago Public Schools, $1 billion in the hole, $1 billion deficit. And what do they attribute it to? The same kinds of issues that county government in Milwaukee is facing. Union concessions that they're seeking that are on the table but haven't been dealt with. The unions won't go for them.
That's why you have furloughs.
But it's still a temporary fix for a long-term problem.
Well,
Anytime
what's the
you're talking
alternative? Layoffs? Those could be
I'm
coming.
not saying that those things that are on the table aren't the kinds of things that will fix the problem.
They're not.
Is this just
I'm just saying for right now,
Is it a
doesn't do the
precursor
job.
is it a precursor to just simply downsizing, which is what they're going to have to do?
Yeah, Scott Walker, that's Scott Walker. He's the chief executive of this county. He's never put together a budget. Never put together a budget that pays the bills of the county. He refuses to raise taxes, and he's a big hero for that to some people. But the fact of the matter is, he is not funding the county. He is not putting enough money into the budget to pay for all the things that the county does. And to think that, after bankrupting this county, he now wants to be governor to bankrupt the state, to treat it as financially the way he's treated Milwaukee County. This is a horrible situation.
But
they offered these furloughs as an alternative to layoffs. Guess what? Today, Scott Walker announced layoffs.
Well, we only have 15 seconds. The county board went along with him.
Yeah.
It did, and some county board members question whether or not they need to. Look, they're losing $1 million a month. They've got a deficit of $1 million a month. You don't do that with furloughs and Band-Aids. They're going to have to downsize. They're going to have to make some tough decisions, too, on benefits.
And the workers should stop their whining and accept this, because there are people in the private sector who are getting pink slips.
Negotiate with them.
Buck up and take your furlough.
Negotiate with
All right, let's go from days off to daydreaming. When the Man of Steel came flying back into the headlines recently, our own man of commentary was intrigued and maybe even a little bit frustrated. But let him explain. Here's Rick Horowitz.
Here's to all the mothers who threw out all the comic books and the baseball cards. Don't forget the baseball cards. Or was it Dumpster Barbie that tore it for you? I'm thinking about comic books today, and maybe you are too, because of the news from New York earlier this week. A copy of the comic book where Superman made his very first appearance, Action Comics #1 from June of 1938, was just sold for $1 million. $1 million, which has a lot more zeros in it than the original cover price, which was 10 cents. So now you're thinking what I'm thinking. You're thinking what we're all thinking every time we hear a story like this about some piece of pop culture trash turning into collectible treasure. You're thinking, Ma, why'd you have to throw it out? Whatever the it was, because you never wanted her to throw out anything of yours, whether it was a mint condition Mickey Mantle or those old sweat socks with the droopy elastic. If only she'd kept it all. If only all the mothers of the world had kept all their kids' stuff exactly where it was for, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, you'd all be rich today, right? Wrong. In fact, exactly the opposite. It's the scarcity that makes the stuff valuable. In Superman's case, for instance, there are only about 100 copies of that first comic book still in existence. That's why the price was so high. If nobody had ever thrown them out, they'd be a dime a dozen. So you don't really mean that you wish all the mothers of the world hadn't thrown their kids' stuff away. You mean that you wish all the mothers of the world except yours had gone right ahead and kept throwing their kids' stuff away, but that your mother, only your mother, had somehow been able to look into the future and see that that junk collection you called your bedroom could actually be worth something someday. Then you'd be rich, instead of, say, super delusional.
Thank you, Rick, and thank you so much for watching. Stay warm. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Superman, that they should try